Welcome back to your quiet space after sundown, the subconscious classroom, where history softens at the edges and even cities can fall asleep. We're so grateful you've joined us this evening. Tonight's 7-part journey takes us not to battlefields or ancient empires, but to something far more modern and far more surreal. This is the story of a city that never sleeps, suddenly going dark, of radios replacing stars, of strangers meeting by candlelight, and of New York City in the summer of 1977 forgetting just for a moment who it was. You are no longer here in the now. You're standing in the warm haze of July, beneath a skyline without light. The traffic has stopped, the subways are still, and somewhere in the silence, the city begins to breathe differently. But before we follow that breath deeper into memory, let us know what forgotten moment in history you'd like to visit next. If you enjoy these twilight reflections, consider subscribing so we can keep drifting together through time's more mysterious corners. Now take a breath. The lights are out. The city is listening. Let us begin. Part 1. A city dimmed by its own light. New York has always been too alive to fall asleep completely. Even at midnight, it thrums with glowing signage, murmuring radios, restless heels on concrete. A city that exhales steam from its grates like it's trying to cool off its own fever. It doesn't go quiet. It hums in its bones. It flickers. It winks. It argues with itself through air conditioners and streetcars and muffled televisions leaking through apartment windows. To live in New York is to live among endless light. Until the night the lights vanished. It was July 13th, 1977. A Wednesday, hot, almost aggressively so. The kind of heat that doesn't soften with sundown. Asphalt retained its warmth like a memory. Tenement walls sweated moisture into bedsheets. The whole city moved slower, more irritated, more exposed. That summer had already drawn the worst out of the city. Crime was at a generational high. Arson cases in the Bronx were counted not in single digits, but by the dozen per night. The son of Sam Killer, still unidentified, stalked lovers' lanes and left handwritten letters to the press. Subway cars were blanketed in graffiti. The economy was in free fall. The city's budget crisis just 2 years earlier had nearly bankrupted the entire municipal system. Teachers were laid off. Hospitals shuttered. Street lamps flickered from lack of maintenance, even before the power failed. The sense of unease was constant, like background radiation. It wasn't chaos, but erosion. And erosion is slower, quieter, the kind of danger you only notice once the foundation is already gone. That night, at 8:37 p.m., a bolt of lightning struck a substation north of the city, near the Indian Point nuclear plant. Power lines sagged under strain. Then another lightning strike followed. Redundancies kicked in, but they were overloaded, then failed. And like a domino falling, one breaker after another tripped. Con Edison tried to reroute the current, but the backup systems weren't ready. The city's load demand was simply too high. People were blasting their air conditioners, jamming elevators, flipping on every fan and appliance to survive the heat. At 9:36 p.m., the first borough, the Bronx, went dark. By 9:40, the entire city had gone silent. The blackout was total. 5 boroughs, 8 million people, 0 light. The subway stopped mid-run. Trains braked hard. Passengers jerked forward. Tunnels felt blacker than space. Some riders lit matches. Others waited in total silence. Above them, traffic lights blinked once and died. Restaurants went quiet. Apartment lights blinked off in unison, as if someone had drawn a curtain across the skyline. Manhattan vanished into shadow. Most people didn't panic. Not at first. There had been blackouts before. A few hours, perhaps. People expected the whine of backup systems to kick in, the familiar hum of city machinery to reassert itself. But it didn't come. Not in 10 minutes. Not in 30. Not in an hour. That's when the city's shape began to shift. Without lights, boundaries disappear. There is no difference between alley and street, between open and closed, safe and unsafe. Sidewalks feel narrower, doors feel thinner. Familiar streets turn unfamiliar. The rhythm of the city changes, slows, or twists. In some places, people emerged cautiously into the night. They lit candles, cranked flashlights, turned on battery-powered radios to listen for news. Others simply leaned out their windows, stared into the void, and realized they were looking at stars they hadn't seen since childhood. Yes, the stars. For the first time in years, constellations returned to New York. The Milky Way poured faintly across the sky. A man in Chelsea mistook Venus for a surveillance plane. Children in the Lower East Side asked if the sky had been replaced. Some people wept quietly from their fire escapes. The galaxy had never left. It had just been hidden behind fluorescence. Elsewhere, things turned. A city already carrying deep social wounds now found itself unpoliced, unsupervised, and blind. The looting began quickly, some by opportunity, some by fury. There was no television footage, only handheld photos taken days later, developed in dim darkrooms. Windows were smashed with bricks and shoes and stolen crowbars. Department stores were gutted, liquor shops emptied, appliance stores swept clean. But it wasn't just theft, it was theater. People danced on rooftops with TVs above their heads. A man in Bushwick tried to sell toasters on the corner by flashlight. Some simply smashed glass to hear it break, to make the city scream. By the next morning, over 1,600 stores had been looted. 1,000 fires had been set. Firefighters, many of them working without sleep, described the night as war without bombs. And yet, even amidst that, the city was more complex than chaos. In Jackson Heights, neighbors formed flashlight brigades to walk the elderly home. In Crown Heights, a family opened their stoop to strangers stranded in the blackout, serving cold fruit and bottled water until their supply was gone. In Washington Heights, a saxophonist played on the corner for 2 hours while others clapped slowly in the dark. Some neighborhoods cooked. With freezers thawing, families hauled meat onto sidewalks and improvised BBQs on trash can lids. Music replaced news. One DJ, working off a generator in the Bronx, broadcast slow jazz and spoken word all night. He ended each set with the same sign-off: "We're still here." The blackout wasn't just a collapse of electricity. It was a collapse of memory. Without light, the city forgot its angles. Without noise, it forgot its rhythm. And somewhere in that forgetting, something strange surfaced, a version of New York that didn't rely on voltage to exist. It was rawer, hungrier, but somehow more honest. The lights didn't return until the next evening, flickering on slowly, like a spell being broken. First the airports, then the financial district, then the rest of Manhattan. When Times Square lit up again, some people cheered. Others sighed. A few wept. And yet it felt different, like something sacred had passed through. The city would repair itself. Stores would reopen. Subways would run. Headlines would shift. But the memory lingered. Not of the looting, not even of the fear, but of the silence. the sudden, impossible hush of a city so used to its own voice that it had forgotten what it sounded like without it. And for one surreal, sleepless night, New York was forced to listen. To itself, to the stars, to the distant echo of who it used to be. And that, perhaps more than any fire or broken window, is what the city would never forget. Part 2, when radios replaced the sky. As the blackout stretched beyond the first hour and then into the second, New York lost something more profound than power. It lost direction. The lights had gone out, but without them, so had the calendar, the wristwatch, the ticker tape rhythms that let New Yorkers know what time it was, what day it was, what they were supposed to be doing. In a city designed to never pause, the absence of momentum is deafening. Trains sat stalled in tunnels, their passengers no longer commuters but quiet witnesses to something shapeless. Elevators froze between floors, some with people trapped inside, counting their breaths in the rising heat. Hospitals kicked on backup generators, but smaller clinics had none. Babies were born by candlelight. Surgeons worked without machines, their scalpels illuminated by nurses holding flashlights in shaking hands. And in living rooms all across the boroughs, people gathered around the only flickers of normalcy left: battery-powered radios. The radio became the city's pulse, with the television screens dark, the printing presses silenced, and telephone lines jammed. The AM band turned into a lifeline. Stations that managed to stay on air through generators became the heartbeat of the night. Updates were sparse, uncertain. No one truly knew the scale of the blackout at first, but even static offered comfort. At least someone was still talking. In the Bronx, one small local station made national news afterward. The host, a longtime jazz DJ with a soft voice and a penchant for vinyl, read poetry over the airwaves between bursts of Duke Ellington and Billie Holiday. No ads, no panic, no directives, just poetry and jazz. As the power outage extended into dawn, his show became a kind of temporary religion, a reason to sit still in the dark and feel something. Not all stations were so calm. Some offered warnings, speculation, conflicting timelines, rumors of more lightning strikes, false alarms about fires downtown. But it was the quieter stations that stayed with people longest, the ones that simply acknowledged the dark without trying to fill it. Radios hummed softly on porches, in hallways, on car dashboards, their glow barely visible, but deeply alive. In many homes, that faint sound was the only sign the world outside hadn't ended. New Yorkers are a hardened breed. They expect inconvenience, but they expect it in patterns: scheduled track maintenance, Monday morning gridlock, the steam pipe that hisses for too long. They don't expect the city to vanish beneath them, not for this long, and not this completely. With the power down, even things that weren't mechanical began to unravel. The city's schedule collapsed. Garbage wasn't collected. Traffic wasn't routed. The delicate choreography of the city's systems, the things you only notice when they're missing, broke down. And yet, people adjusted. They had no choice. In a high-rise on the Upper West Side, a young couple passed the time playing chess by candlelight. They played 12 games before dawn. One floor below, a man began reading his father's old philosophy books out loud to no one in particular. The sound drifted through the vents like sermon. In Bed-Stuy, a group of neighbors hauled mattresses onto the roof to escape the heat. They lay side by side, arms folded behind their heads, pointing out constellations they'd only seen in books. The night sky had returned like a long-lost friend, dazzling, unfamiliar, and a little overwhelming. For a few short hours, the light pollution lifted, and the entire city became an accidental observatory. That reappearance of the stars was, for some, the most memorable part of the blackout. Even the mayor, Ed Koch, reportedly stared up from his darkened office and admitted he had never seen so many stars above City Hall. It was a poetic injustice, to witness that beauty only when everything else had failed. But not all eyes were pointed upward. In the darker corners of the city, movement continued, not celebratory, not communal, but opportunistic. Looters moved with speed and coordination that seemed almost rehearsed. They knew where the goods were. They knew who would respond slowly, if at all. In some blocks, it felt less like a blackout and more like a heist that happened to involve thousands of people. And yet, the looting was not uniform. Some neighborhoods remained untouched, others ransacked completely. In Flatbush, a community church left its doors open and candles lit all night. No one stole a thing. In other places, even the fire trucks weren't safe, their tires slashed by unknown hands. It was, in every sense, a city expressing all of its contradictions at once. There were moments of violence, yes, but also moments of profound care. In Chinatown, an elderly grocer gave away his remaining fresh produce to whoever came by, knowing it would spoil by morning. In Queens, an entire apartment block pooled their bottled water for a neighbor with a newborn. In Spanish Harlem, a musician played soft guitar by the stoop while someone whispered translations of the lyrics in 3 languages. These were not headlines, but they were the city. People in New York often say they live on top of each other. The blackout proved that they could also live with each other when pressed. Time passed strangely. Without digital clocks, without subways, without traffic patterns, the city lost its metronome. For some, the night felt endless. For others, it passed in an instant. Memory stretched and blurred. The mind is not used to counting minutes without tools. The morning came slowly. Some didn't realize it was morning until the sky brightened. Some had been awake all night, listening, watching, or just sitting in the hush. Then a faint blink, a buzz, a street lamp flickered. The hum returned. Not everywhere, not all at once. The power returned in waves, uneven, hesitant, like the city itself wasn't sure it wanted the light back just yet. Downtown lit up first, then parts of Queens. Then slowly, like a tide creeping in, the glow returned to each window, one bulb at a time. Some people cheered, some cursed, some cried. There was relief, but also a strange kind of loss. For all the inconvenience, for all the chaos, the blackout had shown people something they didn't expect. What New York sounded like without its mask. And it was beautiful. There was no script for what happened next. People cleaned up. Shops boarded their windows. Some rebuilt. Others simply left the shattered glass on the sidewalk for someone else to handle. Insurance adjusters moved in. Reporters scrambled to piece together narratives. Politicians made statements. But the memory that stuck was not a speech or a headline. It was the feeling of the sky and the voice from the radio. It was the sound of Duke Ellington bouncing off a brick wall. The sight of an old man dancing in socks on his stoop. The silence of the subway, dormant like a sleeping dragon. The low rustle of a city remembering itself. No city ever intends to forget who it is. But on July 13th, 1977, for just over a day, New York let go of its image, its rhythm, its roles. And in the absence of all that noise, something rare and raw drifted to the surface. It was not peace. It was not panic. It was just honesty. Part 3, the heat, the hum, the heartbeat. The blackout of 1977 didn't begin with darkness. It began with heat, relentless, airless heat. For weeks leading up to July 13th, the temperature in New York City had refused to drop below the high 80s. Concrete baked by day radiated its stored fire by night. The air was heavy, not just with humidity, but with exhaustion. Tempers were shorter, patience wore thin, and sleep became something people tried to chase, then gave up on altogether. Window units strained to keep up. Fans ran constantly, blowing around hot air that felt less like relief and more like surrender. In apartments with no air conditioning, people poured cold water over their sheets. They slept in bathtubs. They left their front doors open and sat in stairwells, seeking any hint of movement in the air. The city was already sweating when the blackout came, and without power, the heat settled like a lid. Without air conditioning, ice, or cold drinks, the city turned to improvisation. People soaked towels and tied them around their necks. Buckets of water were left out on fire escapes so children could dunk their heads. Some residents cracked fire hydrants open, sending geysers into the streets. Illegal, but tolerated. When the power failed, so did the rules. But this wasn't just discomfort. The heat began to shape behavior, pulled people outdoors, onto rooftops, stoops, sidewalks, into alleys where shadows offered some relief. And with so many outside at once, the city began to hum, not with machines, but with breath, voices, and footsteps. It's easy to forget how many sounds in the city are mechanical until they're gone. The buzz of transformers, the metallic rhythm of escalators, the automated voice in the subway. When all of that is stripped away, what's left is the human engine. Laughter, shouting, crying, singing, and the soft rustle of movement. The blackout amplified that heartbeat. In neighborhoods where fire damage was still visible from riots years earlier, the blackout unearthed fresh tensions. In Bushwick and Brownsville, already battered by years of neglect, the darkness became cover for rage. Stores were looted, buildings burned, and hundreds of families displaced. The city's fire department, stretched thin and navigating blindly, couldn't keep up. They were used to heat, but not this kind. Meanwhile, in Times Square, where theaters shuttered and neon signs stopped glowing, an eerie calm took hold. The usually gaudy, overlit heart of the city fell dark and strangely beautiful. Without lights, the theater district became a hushed avenue of shadows. Stage actors, released early from suddenly powerless playhouses, walked home in costume. Further uptown, in Washington Heights, families gathered around transistor radios. One woman grilled chicken over charcoal in the street, serving neighbors she barely knew. Children played double dutch by flashlight. A local preacher stood on a stoop and read aloud from the Psalms, his voice floating upward in the heat. The city was not united. It was never that simple, but it pulsed with a kind of shared awareness that something unusual had happened, something that couldn't be fixed with a switch or a fuse. There were dangers, of course. Hospitals reported increased cases of heat stroke. Diabetics struggled to keep insulin cold. Seniors trapped in high-rises without elevators found themselves stranded. Community volunteers and teenagers, some organized, some spontaneous, climbed dozens of floors to check on the vulnerable. Water was hauled. Fans were rigged using cardboard and string. A system of mutual aid emerged where bureaucracy had failed. And then there was the question of food. With power gone, so went refrigeration. By midnight, people were racing to use up what they had. Freezers thawed. Milk turned sour. Meat softened to the point of no return. What could be cooked was cooked. Street corners filled with the smell of impromptu meals. Sausages grilled on radiator tops. Rice and beans heated over sterno cans. Fried plantains sizzled in pans set over candle flames. It was an accidental feast, one born of necessity, and it would not last long. Store owners, realizing what was coming, tried to salvage what they could. Some gave food away. Others watched helplessly as their goods were looted. Ice became currency, water precious. A single bag of ice could sell for $5 by dawn. Those with basements flooded them to preserve perishables. Some placed butter and milk on windowsills in the hope the night air would be cool enough to delay the inevitable. The strange thing was how normal it all started to feel. By hour 6, people had accepted the new rules. No light, no sound, no cold. And in that acceptance came something else, reflection. Without television, people talked. Without phones, they listened. Without clocks, they moved by instinct. One resident of the East Village later wrote in her journal that the blackout made her feel briefly animal, aware of her breath, her sweat, the moon, and nothing else. Religious communities saw the blackout through their own lens. In Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods of Brooklyn, where Sabbath rituals already forbade the use of electricity, the shift wasn't as jarring. Candles were already lit, meals already cooked. Neighbors helped guide those unfamiliar with darkness through the practice of slow, mindful presence. In churches across the Bronx, pastors led candlelight prayers, not for light to return, but for peace while it was gone. There were small miracles, too. Babies born by flashlight, couples reconciled, a stolen bicycle returned to its owner by a stranger who said, "I thought about it, and this wasn't right." A bodega owner wrote IOUs on scrap paper for regulars who had no cash and repaid them all the next week. And of course, there was music. Always music. In Harlem, conga drums thudded into the night, surrounded by clapping and laughter. In Queens, someone hooked a car battery to a record player and spun Marvin Gaye until sunrise. Jazz seeped from brownstone windows. Disco still thumped from inside clubs that had moved the dance floor onto the street. Without electricity, without DJs or speakers, the music didn't stop. Changed form, became closer, warmer, more alive. In that heat, the city didn't dissolve. It reconfigured. By the time the sun began to rise, New York felt both broken and somehow more whole. The official reports would focus on the damage. The 3,800 arrests, the 1,000 fires, the $300 million in damages. The stories would center on crime, chaos, and economic loss. But the unofficial stories, the ones not printed in bold headlines, told something quieter. That the city, for all its scars, had rhythm. That even without power, it had pulse. That in the heat and hum of that strange, sleepless night, a different New York briefly came to the surface, raw, unfiltered, human. A version of the city that couldn't be powered down because it lived in its people, not its grid. And even when the lights came back, that heartbeat remained. Part for what burned, what was left behind. The night New York went dark, more than lights were lost. By the time the sun rose over the Hudson River on July 14, 1977, the skyline was stained with a faint, unnatural haze. It wasn't just the heat or the dust from idle cars. It was the smoke, the slow, heavy drift of more than 1,000 fires, many of them still smoldering. Brick by brick, window by window, pieces of the city had disappeared overnight. Some of it was stolen, some of it was torched, some of it simply collapsed. And yet, what burned wasn't just physical. The blackout became an X-ray, showing the fractures and infections the city had carried all along. What failed that night wasn't only infrastructure, it was trust, faith in stability, faith in government, faith in fairness. These were the things that caught fire. Bushwick in Brooklyn saw some of the worst damage. Already burdened by a decade of disinvestment, white flight, and slumlord neglect, it was a neighborhood teetering before the first window was smashed. On the night of the blackout, block after block fell to fire and looting. By dawn, over 35 buildings were burned or condemned. Over 300 stores were damaged or destroyed. Firefighters arrived when they could, sometimes blocked by debris, sometimes swarmed by crowds. Some hoses were slashed. Others simply couldn't reach the flames in time. To walk through Bushwick the next morning was to walk through the aftermath of something closer to war than weather. Entire blocks reduced to brick piles, apartments gutted, street signs warped from heat, refrigerators spilled into the sidewalk, still humming faintly if their cords remained attached. The word blackout felt too gentle. This wasn't absence. It was transformation by flame. Yet for all the visual chaos, the fires had a rhythm. Certain stores were untouched. Certain buildings, inexplicably, remained. And in those patterns were hints of intent. Not random destruction.
Sélective destruction.
Rage with memory. Many of the looted shops were chain stores or businesses owned by absentee landlords. Targets weren't just goods, they were symbols of price gouging, of poor treatment, of being ignored. In some neighborhoods, looters bypassed the family-run bodegas and went straight for the national pharmacies, the department stores, the electronics warehouses. A kind of inverted census played out in shattered glass. This was not a political protest. It wasn't a riot in the traditional sense. It was messier than that, more personal, less organized, but not aimless. It was what happens when people believe the system has already looted them, and the lights give them cover to act. To understand the flames, you had to understand what had already burned away years before. By 1977, New York City was a paradox. On the one hand, it was still the cultural capital of the world, home to rising punk bands, Studio 54, the Soho art scene, a publishing industry still booming. But beneath that glitter, whole neighborhoods were in collapse. Abandoned buildings dotted the Bronx and parts of Brooklyn. Fire hydrants didn't work. Teachers went unpaid. Some police precincts ran out of paper for incident reports. The sanitation department struggled to collect garbage on time. There were stretches of the city that looked like they had already been evacuated. The blackout didn't cause this. It revealed it and accelerated it. And yet, amidst the ruins, people returned. Not everyone fled the broken stores. Some owners stood guard all night, baseball bats in hand, watching their life's work disappear. Others opened the next morning as if nothing had happened, sweeping glass out onto the street, lighting candles in place of fluorescent bulbs, handing out coffee brewed over camp stoves. One deli owner in Crown Heights wrote "open" still in black paint on a bed sheet and hung it over his broken front window. He sold sandwiches at a discount until the bread ran out. He gave away the milk. Some churches and community centers opened their doors as relief hubs. Volunteers swept ash. Neighbors brought bottled water. Children passed out flyers. We're still here, in the Lower East Side, A group of teenagers spray-painted murals over boarded-up storefronts. Not tags, but bright murals of hope, fists holding candles, stars hovering over brownstones, a skyline sketched in silhouettes. City officials, scrambling to assess damage, found themselves overwhelmed by contradiction. Some districts had no reported incidents. Others had hundreds. Some fire stations responded to dozens of alarms. Others sat idle. There was no simple map.
No unified narrative.
Only overlapping stories. And yet, amid the chaos, something very New York happened. The press arrived. Photographers stepped into neighborhoods they had ignored for years. Journalists followed fire trucks into streets they'd previously called danger zones. The city that had long been split by class, race, and geography was suddenly stitched together, briefly, by coverage, exposure, and confrontation. Some headlines screamed panic. Others tried to make sense of it. The night the city went mad. Darkness unleashes chaos. But some voices, particularly local reporters and neighborhood columnists, offered something different: understanding. They wrote about the stores that had been robbed not once, but for the 10th time. The buildings that burned because no one had come to fix the wiring for years. The youth who ran because they had nothing left to stay for. Even the mayor, Abraham Beam, could not contain the contradictions. He condemned the looting, praised the resilience, and asked for federal aid in nearly the same breath. The federal aid never came. Instead, insurance companies raised premiums in poor neighborhoods. Banks withdrew. Redlining worsened. For some, the blackout was just a blip. For others, it marked the start of a steep, painful descent. A moment when the light went out and never really came back. But there's a stubbornness in cities like New York. In the face of devastation, people don't just mourn. They document, they rebuild, they make art. The 1977 blackout helped shape the future in strange ways. It was in the wreckage of the Bronx that hip-hop truly began to rise, with DJs and MCs using power from stolen streetlights and sound systems salvaged from looted electronics. It was in the darkness of that summer that entire movements began to form. Punk, street photography, grassroots organizing. The ashes made room for something unpolished, raw, and intensely creative. What burned, in the end, was more than buildings. But what was left behind was something the city hadn't seen in a long time. Itself. Not the image of itself. Not the polished, cinematic version. But the jagged, clumsy, complicated real thing. In the days that followed, neighbors who'd cooked together during the blackout kept talking. Block associations formed. Graffiti artists began using their tags to mark safe spaces. Dancers performed in parks. Radio hosts aired taped stories from blackout survivors. New York didn't heal overnight. It didn't forgive itself either. But it remembered. And in that memory, flickering and uneven like a dying bulb, something resilient kept glowing. Part 5, Echoes in the subway, sparks in the street. Down below the feet of a darkened city, the subway sat frozen like a fossil. On the night of July 13th, when the lights went out, so did the steel arteries beneath New York. Trains stopped mid-tunnel. Fans halted. Intercoms cut out. And the echo chamber of the MTA, the clanking, sparking pulse of the city's underground, was replaced with silence. A silence not often heard in New York, and never for this long. More than 4,000 trains were affected that night. Hundreds of cars trapped between stations, some just feet from platforms, others in long black stretches of tunnel. Passengers accustomed to noise were suddenly immersed in something ancient and unsettling. Total dark, total stillness, the drip of condensation, the slow settling of dust. What started as inconvenience turned surreal. Some riders sat quietly, waiting. Others began singing. In one car uptown, commuters led a round of Lean on Me that echoed through the entire train. In Brooklyn, an elderly woman lit her cigarette lighter and held it above her head like a conductor. Children counted ceiling bolts. Strangers, usually careful not to speak on trains, asked each other's names. Hours passed. Eventually, MTA workers arrived with flashlights. Some doors were pried open by hand. People were guided down onto the tracks and walked, car by car, through the tunnels. It was slow, humid, dangerous work, but no one panicked. There was something about the darkness that demanded calm, a quiet pact not to disturb the shape of things until the city remembered how to move. Up on the streets, it was different. The stillness had its own logic underground, but above, motion ruled. Sparks flew, literal and metaphorical. Without stoplights, intersections devolved into ballet and chaos. Cars nosed into crosswalks, unsure who had right of way. Horns blared in place of signals. In some intersections, Good Samaritans stood in the middle of traffic and played human stoplights, waving their arms like frantic semaphores. In others, it was every driver for themselves. Pedestrians filled the roads. Bicyclists, lit by headlamps or glow sticks, wove between frozen buses and taxis stalled mid-ride. Skateboarders glided down empty avenues. Messengers delivered by foot. Shoes slapped pavement with the rhythm of a march, not a stroll. Manhattan's Midtown, typically gridlocked with taxis and tourists, became a pedestrian plaza, dark, scattered with candlelight and flashlight beams, a slow-moving constellation of people drifting together. In Soho, artist lofts became emergency shelters. Gallerists lit candles inside steel roll-down gates and offered warm wine to strangers stranded far from home. Painters, used to quiet, found themselves hosting 10 or 12 guests apiece. One artist, known only for his enormous red canvases, described the night as the only time I saw silence in motion. In Queens, the blackout created new maps. Block captains, mostly mothers and grandmothers, emerged to direct foot traffic, check on neighbors, and keep watch. Teenagers who'd been skateboarding at dusk became guides with flashlights. Without their Walkmans, they recited baseball stats, movie trivia, and snippets of folk songs. Someone produced a harmonica, another a tambourine. A city without music became its own kind of instrument. But not every spark was symbolic. The blackout didn't just reveal cracks in society. It revealed the literal wires, the fraying, brittle infrastructure of a city long past its prime. On the Lower East Side, a transformer blew and sent a spray of molten metal across a sidewalk. Firefighters, short-staffed and overworked, arrived an hour later, long after the damage was done. In Staten Island, a fuse box shorted out inside a public housing building, starting a hallway fire that took 3 apartments before water pressure could be restored. The city's electrical system had already been hanging by a thread. What the blackout did was pull that thread loose. The power grid, built piecemeal over generations, was an antique machine in modern clothing. Copper wires ran beside 19th century steam tunnels. Water pipes were bolted next to gas mains. Few knew how it all worked. Fewer still knew how to fix it once it failed. And now, without current running through its veins, New York was a body with no heartbeat and no doctor on call. What rose instead was improvisation. In the Bronx, a crew of off-duty electricians dragged their own generators into a community center to provide emergency lighting. In Brooklyn, a butcher shop, already raided and emptied, was repurposed by neighbors into a cold room using salvaged dry ice and discarded insulation. Nurses from a shuttered clinic set up a temporary care post at a Catholic school, treating dehydration and panic attacks by flashlight. The sparks on the street weren't just symbolic. They were the visible nerves of a wounded city. And yet, for all the dysfunction, there was something else, something stranger, something almost celebratory. As the night deepened and the fires burned out and the looting slowed, New York began to dance. Not everywhere, not cleanly, but in enough places that it became part of the story. In the West Village, couples slow danced in the street, swaying to transistor radios. In Harlem, breakdancers spun on cardboard lit by car headlights. A dance troupe trapped in a studio without power took to the rooftop, performing to the skyline. Across the East River, a marching band stranded after rehearsal played for hours on a school lawn, drawing a crowd that grew to hundreds. There was joy, unlikely, uninvited, but real. It came from the absence of noise, the absence of order, the absence of expectation. With no trains to catch, no deadlines to meet, no devices to answer, people simply existed, together, in motion, under stars they forgot they could see. And then came the second wave, the cultural spark. The blackout wasn't just a breakdown. It was a kind of rehearsal, for music, for street art, for theater. In the shadows, the future was warming up. Graffiti crews, free from police presence, painted entire murals overnight. Not just tags, but full walls. Names, symbols, declarations. A new school of hip-hop DJs salvaged power from street lamps and jammed together with MCs in borrowed basements. Filmmakers used the blackout as raw material, shooting by candlelight, recording ambient sound. A new aesthetic was born, grit without apology. In a sense, the blackout gave birth to the era that followed, one of reinvention. Punk, hip-hop, no-wave, graffiti art, and underground film, all sharpened in that power-starved night. The city didn't just flicker back to life, it flared into something new. Of course, not everyone saw it that way. To some, the blackout was proof that the city had lost control, that it had grown too big, too poor, too volatile. To others, it was proof that the people, not the system, were the ones keeping the city alive. That, given nothing, they would still build something, light or no light. The truth, as always, lived somewhere between. And when the lights finally returned, one street at a time, one borough after another, it wasn't with a cheer. It was with a slow, almost reluctant sigh. The heartbeat of the city returned to its usual tempo, faster, more crowded, more complicated. But for those who heard it differently, the echo remained. Deep below the street, in the silence of the subway, in the static of the radio, and in the sparks still dancing across the skyline. Part 6. The morning after nobody slept. Morning came to New York slowly, not in the usual burst of sirens, newspaper deliveries, and coffee carts wheeled into place, but in layers. First, a thin blue light against the buildings, then the rustle of tired feet, then, at last, the mechanical sigh of a power grid exhaling back to life. Lights flickered, radios buzzed. A low collective hum returned to the city like a memory shaking itself awake. But New York had not slept. Across all 5 boroughs, people wandered the streets not in panic, but in something stranger, a kind of dazed silence. Some blinked in confusion at streetlights that had turned back on. Others emerged from stairwells, having spent the night checking on neighbors, carrying candles, boiling water, or fanning their children with pieces of cardboard. There was no single story of that morning, only fragments. In a high-rise in Chelsea, a family stood barefoot on the balcony, still holding melted popsicles from the night before. In Brooklyn, a man swept glass from his stoop while his young son drew a sun with chalk beside the soot. In the Bronx, smoke still curled from burned-out shops as church bells rang faintly over the rooftops. For a city so used to its own momentum, the sudden stillness of that morning was disorienting. Trains had not yet resumed. Traffic lights flickered yellow but still had no real authority. And in the early light, New Yorkers found themselves doing something they rarely allowed themselves to do: standing still. And then, slowly, the city began to ask, what now? The newspapers, those that managed to publish with backup generators, ran headlines like "City Paralyzed," "Looting SPREE," "Blackout Shame." Photographs of flames and broken windows dominated front pages. Television stations, once back online, aired looped footage of smoldering storefronts and shaky interviews with exhausted officials. But none of these quite captured the breadth of what had happened. Because what lingered most wasn't the fire. It wasn't the theft. It was the sheer, collective unreality of a night that seemed to bend the rules of urban life. A night where the city had not shut down, but rather reassembled itself in unexpected human ways. For the people who lived through it, the blackout wasn't just a story. It was a sensation. Sticky air, silence, flashlight shadows, stars above unfamiliar rooftops. A city that should have ground to a halt had instead revealed its machinery. Messy, improvised, deeply personal. The power may have gone out, but the people kept going. City services scrambled to catch up. Sanitation crews began clearing the streets. Firefighters, many of whom had worked through the entire blackout without sleep, were rotated out in shifts, some collapsing on cots in station garages. MTA personnel inspected the subways one tunnel at a time, looking for stalled trains, track damage, and displaced commuters. Police compiled reports, though many were incomplete or contradictory. Entire neighborhoods had become unreachable. Some were still burning. The damage was real. An estimated 1,600 stores had been looted or vandalized. Entire city blocks bore the marks of fire and broken glass. Over 3,000 people were arrested. Property damage was later estimated at over $300 million, more than double the damage from the 1965 blackout. And unlike that earlier outage, which had been marked by calm and cooperation, this one had ended in upheaval. And yet, as the sun rose higher, life resumed. Corner bodegas with broken windows were still open for coffee. People paid with coins counted slowly, carefully. Someone handed over a $5 bill for a bagel and got no change, but no complaint either. At a diner in Queens, patrons sat under dim bulbs, sipping lukewarm coffee and quietly recounting their night to anyone who would listen. In neighborhoods hardest hit by looting, residents worked quickly to board up storefronts. Some painted over graffiti with messages of resilience. "We're not done. Still open. Thanks for last night." These signs weren't cries for help. They were declarations. The city had not collapsed. It had transformed, then reappeared. In hospitals, nurses compared blackout stories between rounds. One doctor told of delivering a baby by flashlight and then walking the newborn up 12 flights of stairs because the elevator hadn't yet restarted. In Harlem, a local clinic was turned into a makeshift cooling center with box fans and hand-squeezed lemonade, offered to seniors and toddlers alike. Schools where open became sanctuaries, not for classes but for stories. Teachers scrapped their lessons and instead asked their students, "Where were you when the lights went out? What did you see? What did you hear?" Students raised their hands not to recite, but to remember. And everywhere, people were talking, not yelling, not debating, just talking. About the stars, about the heat, about the man who lit candles for the whole block, about the neighbors they finally met, about what they thought when the lights didn't come back, about what it meant to see their city without its makeup on. The blackout had exposed things, weaknesses, fault lines, injustice, but also, strangely, power. Not electric power, human power, the power to adapt, the power to connect, the power to improvise when the systems failed. It had also sparked fear in City Hall. Officials scrambled to contain the narrative. Mayor Beam held press conferences flanked by tired aides, blaming Con Edison, vowing to investigate, pledging law and order. But the city didn't feel lawless, felt exposed, like a body fresh out of surgery, stunned by its own vulnerability. In poorer neighborhoods, the morning after meant tallying what was lost. Not just stolen goods, but trust, a sense that the city cared. For many, the blackout didn't create a crisis. It revealed one already in motion. In wealthier districts, people mourned melted ice cream, frozen dinners gone soft, theater tickets wasted. In struggling neighborhoods, people mourned the stores that wouldn't reopen, the housing that wouldn't be repaired, the friends who'd been arrested or displaced. Still, there were moments that lingered like dreams. The band playing on the fire escape, the old man who read poetry to strangers, the rooftop where strangers shared a meal by candlelight, the mother who wrapped her child in damp cloth and sang lullabies under a sky full of stars. The blackout gave New Yorkers something they didn't realize they were missing: pause. Not stillness in the romantic sense, but the kind that forces reflection. Without machines, without obligations, without the buzz of obligation, people saw their surroundings and themselves differently. When the lights returned, many felt a kind of loss, like waking from a fever dream, like blinking back into a version of life that now felt overly bright. New York moved on. It always does, but the events of that night were folded into the city's DNA. They became one more layer in its palimpsest of memory, etched alongside the blackout of '65, the blizzard of '47, the strike of '67. Another scar, another story. For some, it was a trauma. For others, it was a strange kind of miracle. Most, perhaps, would simply call it what it was: a night when New York forgot who it was and discovered something else entirely. And the morning after, with the city blinking itself back to life, that realization still hung in the air, quiet, electric, waiting to be remembered. Part 7. The light returns, but not the same. The power didn't return all at once. Came back like dawn, soft, partial, uncertain. First a buzz in a wall, then a flicker overhead, then a glow from a street lamp that hadn't worked in years. Radios clicked on, refrigerators hummed, coffee makers blinked uncertainly at their owners, asking for the time. New York was reanimating, but slowly and not quite like before. It took hours for the grid to fully stabilize. Neighborhoods lit up block by block. The Upper East Side came back before the South Bronx, Midtown before Bushwick, The order wasn't random. It mirrored the city's invisible architecture of privilege.